Hello, welcome everybody to this special podcast episode discussing the ingredients of success to IT project delivery. I'm here with Jack Ramsay and Christoph Kettenbach, who have a combined 70 years of experience in IT project delivery. And they have taken all their experiences, their successes and their challenges and have decided to create a book, a sort of handbook explaining the most important aspects of IT project delivery. So let's start off with the introductions. This is Jack. Could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Jack Ramsay. I've spent a long time, since 1986, working in IT delivery. I've ran projects, some well, some not so well. I've recovered projects. I've presided over very significant portfolios, my last one being close to $7 billion. And I'm now working for myself in Multiply. I've created a new company, myself and about 30 other colleagues, and we're able to help clients avoid cooking up disaster after disaster in terms of IT delivery. It's been a common theme over the last 40 years, and we just wanted to put pen to paper to make it clear what we've learned over the years and help people avoid similar problems.
Great, thank you very much. And Christoph, can you introduce?
Yeah, quite the same. So being in the trenches of IT projects and IT delivery quite long, since mid-90s. And being in many places, not only system integrators and kind of delivering the stuff large scale, but also kind of smaller companies. But it's all my career is kind of linked to IT and also to IT projects. So I'm still passionate about it. And we met during our time in Accenture quite a while.
In the trenches.
In the trenches, so to speak. It's quite a while. And I learned a lot from Jack, I need to admit, in terms of also the topic we discussed today, kind of estimation and contingency. And it's still fascinating. And therefore, we came up with the idea to really write it down and use it as Jack progresses with his company.
Amazing. I have a starting off question for both of you. IT is quite a mature industry at this point. I mean, it's been around for almost over 70 years. Why do you think it's still such a discussion, and why are there so many pitfalls still when it comes to IT project excellence?
I think there's a couple of things. Certainly, the technology has advanced massively over the time that I've been in the industry. I started work in 1986. For a UK-based systems house, and the technology itself was rather primitive in those days. But the mistakes that people make are still the same to this day. So a friend of mine once joked that when he gets called in to do a review of a project that's gone wrong, he starts writing the PowerPoint presentation with the summary findings before he even gets to the client's kickoff meeting. I think there is something about the IT industry that's quite stunning, which is that given the scale of the industry, it's one of the least regulated business. The whole business of software development, standards are largely used on a voluntary basis. There are no external standards that are enforced pretty much anywhere in the world. It's very much a matter of opinion, what you should have done if something goes wrong. And a lot of people who don't understand how to get it right simply don't get it right. And in my own experience, anything that's bigger than about 20 people working on it is a very strong candidate for a very significant delay or a massive budget overrun. And it's been that way for long. If you try and build a house, people are going to show up and check you did things properly. If you work in financial services, there are standards around how you have to do revenue accounting and things like this. But IT, it's pretty much left to the standards of the systems integrators, I guess, and to some extent the in-house standards of organizations. But again, the quality assurance needs to be there. And if it's not, it's always going to be a topic. So we had the idea to put a book together and not to make it too formal or methodological, but rather a practical guide to things that we've seen that have gone wrong, that have been very expensive mistakes for some people.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack elaborated it already. Kind of a lot of experience shows that there is a certain kind of craftsmanship you can apply. And it's kind of all over the decades. I mean, estimation, that's our topic today, was there in the 80s, was there in the 90s, was there. So it's still there, and it's still something which is challenging, and still something which is You don't find so much regulations like when we build a house, or whether this kitchen is really following any standards we're visiting here. So it comes down to what we learned and what we define as a good practice and what we think is important, and also kind of the pitfalls or the things going wrong. That's a constant repeating of history. Yeah. So you kind of 30 years later, you see the same pitfalls. People trap in, and also kind of the way to come it out. It's also more or less the same. Sometimes you can add a little bit with techniques, or there's some new thing coming out to help. But yeah, it's rather that.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about two specific topics: effort estimation and contingency management. Jack, would you like to start with effort estimation and what exactly it is and why it's so important in IT project delivery?
Yeah, there is a challenge, obviously, trying to understand the size of the problem when you start an IT project. One of the specific challenges to this industry is if it's a new project, the chances are high there's a new technology, or there's a new thing out there, or the latest and greatest big thing. We've seen many iterations as things have gone from mainframe-based to client-server through net-centric, web-based development. We're all in the cloud now. New tools, new techniques coming along all the time. Miraculously, one of the big issues is people forgetting things they have to estimate. That's a problem. There's the estimating itself. Once you understand what it is roughly you want to do, you need some sort of parametric model that says this is typically what it will cost to develop a certain thing. You can have issues with people who estimate things at too high a level. If you estimate at a high level, you're probably going to underestimate. If you estimate in detail too specifically, you're probably going to overestimate the project. So, and then it's a question of mapping that onto a work plan that makes sense. Because once you've done your estimating at the start of the project, you should be done with estimating. And it shouldn't be that you're re-estimating every time reporting period to say what you think remains, because experience shows that people that do that are too optimistic and rely on hope as a leadership tool, which very rarely works. And also, once you've obviously estimated the project, you've got to try and then figure out what's the optimum schedule. The most optimum way of doing it should be around having a team size peak, roughly the number of weeks that the project's going to last. So if it's 50 people for a year, that's quite an efficient way to run an engagement. And you've got to make sure all of this adds up together. But it all starts with the estimate. And usually before the estimation begins, the schedule has already been set. And it makes it particularly challenging because people get optimistic and saying, yeah, I think we can do it in the time that's available, rather than saying how much do we really have to do, and then work it back from there.
Jack, at this point, I already mentioned a few, but do you have any other pitfalls?
No, I want to highlight one which you kind of mentioned very in the first thing, and it was very important. So one of the pitfalls is not that you estimate wrong what you see in terms of, okay, I'm sure I need to do task A, B, C, but you're forgetting the entire thing. So what we found out during the course of our work is very often people tend to look, is A now 40 or 45? And you overlook a whole thing. And that is much more grave in terms of that it has a negative impact to you. And this is already learning. So when you check an estimate, rather don't get into the details about what you see, but find out whether these guys who made the estimate potentially have forgotten the entire thing. It's already something you can apply in ensuring a good estimation quality. And so on. So there are many things like, for example, we found out, or the companies we worked in found out that there are kind of relationships between estimation portions. So for example, if you do a design, build, test, software development, there's a relationship between the effort of coding and the effort of testing. And over time, you find this out, and you can use this also as a quality thing. And that's what we kind of said, okay, now collect all this, because it's in our head, and come up also with a good checklist in terms of, okay, that's the thing to look for, to really make sure and distill, let's say, our experience on how getting things good and avoiding the pitfalls we all seen.
I can give you a good example to what you just said. One of my co-founders of Multiply, Frank Riemensberger, was asked to do a review of a program that somebody else was leading. I won't say who it was, but it was a competitive vendor. And they were trying to get into this. We've only got so much budget. We've only got so much time. So the optimism came into the estimating. And the estimate that was presented showed that for a build effort of 30,000 days, they needed a test effort of 500. Now you're going to laugh when you hear this, because if it's 30,000 days, you're going to be spending, 10, 15,000 days on testing. That's just a reality, because anything you build at that scale is going to have a lot of bugs in it, and it's going to be complicated. And coming back to your second point about forgetting things completely, I was asked once to estimate everything I need to do to switch off an old system and put the new one in place. And when that was reviewed by the person running the software factory, they recognized that I had, I think, 2,100 days of work that they did not expect to see in the work plan, because there were things like initial loads, data conversion to do, preparing the technical environment in production. And suddenly there was a crisis on the program because we recognized we'd underestimated it by 40,000 days. And that's very common. This happens a lot, and that's why checklists are invaluable when you do these kind of things. Even to this day, we still get it wrong.
And then the other thing is, very often I found out, and I find it a little bit astonishing. I mean, perhaps it's because I'm still in this topic, and I still love it to some extent. Some guys also said, I did an estimation in my youth and I don't want to do it anymore. But I mean, I've done a lot of estimation myself. I'm more now in kind of checking estimations of other guys. And what I found astonishing is that, for example, there is, let's say some science about it. Science clearly says, it even predates us, that in the very, very early stages, when the requirements are very rough, and when you, in English you can say, when you write them on a napkin, you cannot expect an estimate with 2 digits after the comma being precise. There is something which is called a cone of uncertainty, and this cone says, in this early stage, don't ever expect that people are accurate to an extent that they're 4 times off. And this is something which is very often either neglected or not known. And one of the things is, it's very easy. It's comparably easy to estimate the next path or the next thing of your project. So if you have the napkin, you estimate the detailed requirements. But it's very tough to really come up with a good estimate what it all takes. And in the end, everybody is interested in, this project of how much is it? How long will it take? Everybody wants to know it for several reasons. Either you be a guy who offers this as a system integrator, who offers some help, or either you are a company and you want to run a portfolio of IT projects, which you need to do because you need projects, because you need to adapt your business. And you not want to know how many of them can I do with a given budget. So that's why estimation never dies, more or less.
So it's throughout the whole process.
Yeah.
Okay. What would you say for both of you is the biggest lesson or the most important lesson that you learned with your years of experience? What's the one thing that helps you really navigate through the pitfalls? Maybe your best practices.
So it's the second topic. That's why we dig into that. Don't forget the contingency. So even with, let's say, feeling that you are kind of know it and have learned it over all these decades, there are known unknowns in terms of, I do not exactly know what it takes to develop this because it's new technology. So I know it's a little bit unknown. And there are unknown unknowns, very often forgotten. So even though that you kind of think you're very good, you apply many methods, you're reading a best practice manual, etc. Contingency is very important, and contingency should not be forgotten. So that's one of the biggest lessons. Take another one. Contingency is not only budget. Contingency is also time. And it's astonishing how often you see a situation where they either forget contingency as a whole or only put budget in it, but no time box, as if you could extend the existing calendar we all have at month number 13 in a certain year. It is not possible. So this is kind of, when you ask about the biggest lesson, don't forget a contingency.
And you will need it. And you will use it. Yeah. So having worked for Accenture, one of the biggest systems integrators out there, we had as a standard practice to add contingency, usually 15 to 20%, depending on the risk profile of the project. And this is not money that was typically kept by the systems integrators. They typically do have to spend it because things will happen that you didn't know were going to happen. So a very good best practice is staff the project to assume that you will use the contingency, because most people staff it according to the plan without the contingency. And then what do you end up with? You don't have enough capacity to actually deal with this, the things that you didn't know about. And then you start to run under pressure, you start to run late. So that's a very good practice to have. There's one rule of thumb that I also apply, just not a rule of thumb even, just a thing to watch out for. It's always much more difficult to get data out of a system than to put it in. So anytime you're dealing with data coming out in terms of any form of reporting, or whether it's online or paper-based, it doesn't really matter. That can always be a dilemma. And I did see on one occasion an estimate for something that was clearly going to be too low. I looked at it. It was to print a bill of lading, which is something you put on a shipment, and it was estimated at 10 days. And I didn't know much about what this thing was, but when somebody explained the sort of data that went on this paper, I realized it was massively wrong. We immediately just upped the estimate from, and the project was in flight, from 10 days to 500, and it finished at 1,400. That was obviously somebody who had the napkin, who thought, how difficult can it be? And it actually turned out to be extremely difficult to do what they wanted to do.
Yeah, you mentioned here that that some people may be a bit over optimistic, make it a lot shorter than it might actually take.
Salespeople.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved here that determine how long exactly it's going to take. How do you handle that situation where you have different parties maybe assuming that it's going to take longer, others where they assume it's a bit shorter?
I'll tell you what I do. Well, Christoph thinks. I mean, you've got to talk to the right people. The right people are typically the developers. And if you're dealing with new technology, try and get access to not the salespeople of the organization that are selling the technology, but some of the people. They have their own engineers, some of their own technical people, because they will actually understand what it takes. And you have to be careful what you ask people as well, because it's better once you subdivide things at a detailed task level. Does it include testing? What kind of testing does the estimate include? Does it include the documentation that goes with it? Because the detailed design and test documentation can be quite significant as well. So it's worthwhile having quite a work breakdown structure for the given tasks and just go through with the developers how long does this typically take. And the second thing, which I would add, try and have some prototyping very early on using the technology you intend to use just to verify the estimates. You can do that at the beginning because you probably have to develop some sort of architecture anyway, and it's worthwhile prototyping that early on because you will see the reality that you will face anyway. So it's always good to do that and use it as a feedback loop.
Yeah, and there's another thing. This is kind of making sure that the people who are doing the estimate have a good idea about how. So we talked about if the requirements are on the napkin, so that's the what side. Okay, we talked about it needs to be more precise, but you need to have an idea of how do you develop it. And there's a famous litmus test I learned when I was with him in terms of hand them a sheet of paper, regardless how big the project is, tell them to draw the solution on this paper with a pencil. If they're unable to do it, they have no clear vision on the how, which is more realistic that it is not correct. That's the one aspect. The other aspect is the, let's say, kind of cultural aspect, in terms of that you have this situation that it's already written in stone that this project needs to be done, and the sales or in normal corporations is like in the annual budgeting cycle, we already reserved such a budget. And this gives a bias in terms of it must fit into this. And this is tricky. I mean, you can do a design to budget then and say people, we don't talk about money, but talk about how much we deliver. Perhaps we deliver an additional reason in the second layer, which is a little bit difficult. Or really overcome this and say, okay, last year when you did this initial estimate, you did not have the full picture. You now have it. But this needs, let's say, a cultural understanding of that this is the nature of estimation. That you kind of, as you learn, you need to refine and you come up with better numbers.
And if you're an in-house organization and you need to do something like this, the probability is very high that the system integrators can help you with this. Talk to them very early on. Companies like Accenture, Deloitte, others, they are really world-class at this. They have proper estimating models. They've done it before. Involving them very early on, even if it's just to try and get a sketch out of what the solution might be and an estimate for what it might take. I mean, it might cost you some money to get them to do it, but it's money well spent because they will be able to give you a rough indication. And it depends what you're doing, because there are some rules of thumb. If you want to do an S4HANA migration upgrade, you're probably looking at something of the order of 1.75 to 2.25% of the company's annual revenue. That's a good rule of thumb that you can apply. They know these things, and it's worth getting them in, because it's what they do for a living and they're very good at it. And it's good that they do that long before you start taking things to the board, securing budgets, which will be very difficult to increase at a later point.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, you've both shared some really valuable insights here. Do you have any last pieces of advice or real key takeaways that you would share to someone who is starting a journey of IT project delivery?
As I said before, do get advice from an expert. There are many out there. You can call me, Jack Ramsay at Multiply. We certainly can advise and we can help with that. If you are, though, about to undertake something big, even if you have the safety net of a big systems integrator to help you with the delivery, make sure that you meet the key members of the delivery team. They shouldn't just be impressive in their ability to talk and demonstrate an understanding of your problem. Really kick the wheels on where have they done it before, what were their experiences, and also try and understand a little bit about some of their bad experiences. Mm-hmm. I got very, very badly burned on my first project in Accenture back in 1993, and it was totally my fault. It was nothing to do with anybody else inside Accenture. It was a mixture of optimism and inexperience, I would say. It was quite a big project, and it wasn't meant to be. It ended up fairly big. I found clever ways to navigate it. I was able to recover the situation, but it would have been better for me to get more help from really seasoned delivery folks, because certainly there were many around me inside Accenture that could have helped me at the time. Instead, I carried this burden for a long time on the project and somehow got through it. But it was a real education for me. The mistakes that I made, I never repeated, and learned a lot from it that stood me in good stead. And from that point on, I really did everything by the book. And having a good, solid methodology that you follow is critical as well. And most people, when they get into difficulty, what do? They start to move away from the methodology, which is known to work. We'll skip a test cycle. Oh, we'll do less documentation. We'll do less reviews. That just leads you into messier and more difficult water. So really kick the wheels on what you think you're buying to be sure that you're getting a good solution, because if one of the SIs does come in and the project goes horribly wrong, it doesn't help your organization very much to say I bought the best. So do your homework, or have somebody like Multiply help you do exactly that.
Adding to this, so quality assurance in terms of makes a lot of sense in terms of asking people who are knowledgeable about the craftsmanship of estimating the pitfalls. That's helpful, but also helpful is, and it would be rather a general recommendation of myself, is start to also capture your learnings. So capture historical data in terms of you found out that over the time we kind of tend to underestimate that in that section always when we kind of deliver a certain kind of series of project. Maybe kind of, let's talk about, you have a lot of warehouses in your company and you do warehouse projects, and so apply your learning, capture historical data. And we mentioned parametric estimating tools in the beginning. For me, they look like the holy grail in terms of that is, and they are really difficult, but it is worth to start also small. With your first experience, or when the project is done, really capture the experience and use it. And I found out the learning cycle is quite fast, and companies can even kind of make their same quick quality checks in terms of over time, like check already mentioned in terms of S4HANA is related to the revenue, and you can create this very, very soon with already kind of doing 3-4 historical data of projects. And that's really helpful.
And of course, the best advice is Christoph and I are writing this book together on delivery. There'll be this initial teaser coming out, which is just around estimating and contingency management. So take a look at that. There's a lot of lessons learned in there. There are some true war stories, things that we went through, things that we've seen. Some things you will read and say, this is unbelievable, but they are believable. These things really happen.
Things happen, yeah.
So,
Great. Thank you both so much for your time and your valuable insights. I'm excited to read it in your book. Yeah, thank you for being here.
yeah, thank you for watching. Happy reading.